You think you know me because I clean your floors.
あなたは私のことを床掃除をしているから知っていると思っているのですね。
You dare mock me in front of them? Alexander's voice cut through the grand lobby like glass shattering. His words were meant for the Japanese investors clustered behind him, but his fury was fixed on Naomi, the maid with the mop still dripping at her side. The sound lingered, echoing against marble walls. Dozens of eyes turned toward the slender young woman in her faded blue uniform. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tightened her grip on the mop as if it were a weapon she refused to drop. The story had not begun here. It had begun with a simple accident. Hours earlier, the shareholders' gathering had transformed the Ishikawa Global Lobby into a stage of excess. Crystal chandeliers bathed the floor in golden light. Waiters in white gloves glided with champagne flutes. The city's elite, men with polished cufflinks, women with diamond collars, mingled beneath banners celebrating quarterly profits. And there was Naomi. Bent low, bucket at her side, shoulders square as she scrubbed a streak of mud tracked in by expensive Italian shoes. Her almond eyes lifted only briefly, catching glimpses of the spectacle she was never invited to join. Alexander Ishikawa stood in the center like a monarch on display. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that hugged his tall frame, a silver tie knotted with perfect symmetry. His black hair gleamed under the chandeliers. He moved with the quiet arrogance of a man used to being obeyed, his pale face carved with angles sharp enough to slice through silence. Naomi was mopping when it happened, a careless step backward, his arm brushing hers. A splash of amber liquid leapt from his glass and bled across the polished floor. The room erupted in chuckles. Alexander's lips curled. "Unbelievable," he muttered, dabbing his sleeve with disgust. His voice carried, deliberate. "Even the help doesn't know how to stay out of the way." The crow, Dee, laughed harder. Naomi's chest constricted. Her cheeks burned hot, but she bowed her head, willing herself into invisibility. She had endured worse. If she reacted, she knew, she'd be seen as the angry one. But Alexander wasn't finished. He turned back to the investors at his side. 3 older men in tailored black suits, their faces inscrutable, their Japanese words rolling like waves. Naomi's heart clenched. She recognized the cadence instantly. Her ears had not heard Japanese spoken so closely in years. Alexander replied smoothly in their language, switching from English without hesitation. His tone was sharp, too sharp, his words dismissive. To the room it was gibberish. To Naomi, it was venom. "She's nothing but a janitor," he scoffed in Japanese. "Background decoration. Don't mind the clumsy girl." The words cut deeper than the laughter. Something inside Naomi snapped. Her head lifted, her hazel eyes glowing like embers locked on him. And then, clear, resonant, impossible, Naomi answered, in flawless Japanese, "Forgive me, sir, but your words stain you more than my mop stains this floor." The silence was absolute. Glasses froze mid-air. A waiter stumbled, catching his tray just in time. The investors' eyes widened in shock, their mouths parting in surprise. Alexander turned, slowly, like a man staring at a ghost, his face drained of color. "You—" his English faltered. "You speak?" Naomi did not flinch. Her back straightened, her voice calm, each syllable delicate and precise as if carved from steel. "Yes, I speak, and I understand everything you said." The crowd gasped as though a spell had been broken. The maid, the invisible one, had just unveiled a hidden power that none of them could deny. Alexander's jaw tightened. His eyes darted between Naomi and the stunned investors. For the first time that night, the control he wore like armor began to crack. And Naomi, mop still glistening in her hand, stood tall in the golden lobby, no longer invisible. The chandelier's light seemed harsher now, like a spotlight turned on the wrong actor. Alexander Ishikawa, the flawless CEO, stood frozen in the lobby, his confidence unraveling thread by thread. Around him, whispers sparked like small fires. "She speaks Japanese? Did you hear her? Perfect accent. Who is she?" Naomi kept her posture straight, though her heart thundered in her chest. She hadn't planned this. She never meant to reveal her secret in front of hundreds. But humiliation had cornered her, and pride had lifted her head when silence begged her to bow. The 3 Japanese investors exchanged quick murmurs, their eyes lighting with intrigue. One of them, Mr. Sato, tilted his head and asked Naomi directly in Japanese, "Where did you learn to speak our language so fluently?" Naomi hesitated. She thought of her years in Tokyo, her nights in cramped apartments studying under weak lamps, her mornings teaching English to children who called her sensei. She thought of her mother's voice urging her to return home when sickness struck, and of the university dreams she left behind. All of it lived in her, though none of it showed on her worn uniform. But before she could answer, Alexander cut in sharply. "She doesn't," he snapped in English. "She memorized a phrase or two, that's all. A trick, nothing more." Laughter rippled again, this time not at Naomi, but at him. A man defending his pride too quickly, too defensively. Naomi's lips parted, but she caught herself. She would not argue. Not here. Still, the damage to Alexander's image had begun. His executive assistant, Clara Hensley, a tall, angular woman in a red sheath dress, sensed the danger and struck fast. Clara was Alexander's shadow, known for her sharp tongue and sharper ambition. She leaned toward him, her voice pitched to carry just far enough. "Shall I dig into her background, sir?" Clara's cold eyes flicked to Naomi. "I'm sure the truth isn't so impressive. After all, maids aren't scholars." Naomi swallowed hard, her knuckles whitening on the mop handle. She knew that look. The predatory smirk of someone about to strip her dignity layer by layer. And so it began. The next day, rumors circled like vultures. Clara spread whispers through the building. She dropped out of college. Her family's drowning in hospital bills. She couldn't even finish her degree. Every secret Naomi carried like quiet shame was pulled into daylight. Even the janitorial staff avoided her now, afraid association would drag them down too. By noon, Naomi was summoned to the 34th floor, the executive level she had only ever polished, never entered. She walked down the hall, her cheap shoes squeaking against carpet woven with gold thread. She was led into the boardroom, where Alexander sat at the head of a glossy obsidian table. Clara perched beside him, one long leg crossed over the other, smirking like a cat that had cornered its prey. The room brimmed with executives, their tailored suits forming a wall of skepticism. Alexander steepled his fingers. His voice was deceptively calm. "Miss Bennett, my assistant tells me you've misled people, that you pretended to speak Japanese to humiliate me. Care to explain?" Naomi's chest tightened. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she refused to drop her gaze. "I didn't pretend," she said quietly. "I speak Japanese. I lived there for 4 years. Clara laughed softly, her nails clicking against the table. "And yet you mop floors for a living. How very convenient." A low chuckle spread across the room. Naomi felt it like stones hurled at her. She looked at Alexander, his face unreadable but his eyes sharp, almost hungry. Did he want her to fail? Did he want proof that she was a fraud so his pride could be restored? "Very well," he said denly. His voice turned cold as steel. "We'll test it. Tomorrow you'll stand in on a meeting with our Japanese investors. If you are what you claim, you'll prove it. If not—" His pause was deliberate, cruel. "You'll be dismissed. Permanently." The room hummed with anticipation. Clara's smile widened. Naomi's throat tightened, but she forced herself to nod. Her hands trembled beneath the table, hidden in her lap, but her voice emerged steady. "Then tomorrow, sir, you'll have your answer." When she left the boardroom, her legs felt hollow, her chest caving. The elevator doors closed around her, and only then did she allow herself to lean against the mirrored wall, eyes stinging with tears. She had no choice. Tomorrow would either bury her or make her impossible to ignore. The night before the meeting, Naomi sat at her small kitchen table, her mop bucket pushed into a corner, her textbooks spread before her like old ghosts. The apartment smelled faintly of disinfectant and boiled rice. Her younger brother, Caleb, 16, lanky with sleepy brown eyes, watched her silently from the couch. "You're really gonna do this?" he asked finally, his voice soft. Naomi traced a finger over the creased page of her Japanese-English dictionary, one she hadn't opened in years. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. Caleb frowned. "You shouldn't have to prove yourself to that man, to any of them." But Naomi only smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes, dignity has to be fought for, even if it shouldn't. She practiced late into the night, her voice rising and falling in fluid Japanese phrases. Caleb dozed off eventually, But Naomi stayed up, whispering conversations into the silence, as if Tokyo itself were listening. Morning arrived like a blade. The 34th floor was transformed for the investor meeting. Long polished table, leather chairs, glass walls overlooking Manhattan like gods peering down. Suits crowded the room, all sharp edges and sharper eyes. Naomi stood near the Wubio. All, wearing her uniform still, Bucket left downstairs as if to remind everyone of her place. Alexander entered last, tall, immaculately dressed in navy today, his silver cufflinks gleaming. His expression was unreadable, but a faint smirk tugged at his lips when he saw Naomi. Clara walked beside him, her red lips curved with anticipation, like a vulture circling before the kill. The Japanese delegation arrived with quiet dignity. 5 men, bowing slightly, their movements deliberate, their eyes scanning the room. When they began speaking, the company's hired translators leaned in, whispering rushed interpretations. But even Naomi could hear the mistakes. Words blurred, meanings twisted, respect lost in translation. Naomi's chest tightened. She bit her tongue. Clara noticed. She pounced. "Sir," she said sweetly to Alexander, her gaze slicing toward Naomi, "perhaps our janitor would like to correct the professionals, since she claims to be so gifted." A ripple of laughter flickered around the table. All eyes turned. Naomi's hands trembled. She wanted to disappear. But then Mr. Sato, the elder investor from before, looked at her with calm curiosity and said, in Japanese, "Please, if you can hear us, speak. We would welcome clarity." Naomi inhaled. Her pulse thundered. But she stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was steady, flowing, elegant. She translated every word faithfully, her tone warm but precise, capturing nuances the translators had butchered. Where the professionals had stumbled, she bridged smoothly. She didn't just carry words, she carried intent, dignity, respect. The investors' faces softened. Nods spread among them. Even Mr. Sato's lips twitched into the faintest smile. The room was stunned. Clara's smirk shattered. She shifted in her chair, her nails digging into her notebook. The translators flushed crimson, fumbling with their headsets. Executives who had laughed at Naomi yesterday now stared in disbelief. But Alexander, he sat still, his jaw tight, his knuckles whitening on the table's edge. His eyes, dark and stormy, were fixed on her. The room might have been gasping, murmuring, reeling, but Naomi saw only him, and in his gaze, she caught it, the first crack in his arrogance. Still, he couldn't let it go. When she finished, Alexander leaned back in his chair, forcing a thin smile. "Well," he said lightly, "our cleaning staff seems to have had her lucky day. Don't mistake parlor tricks for true competence." His voice carried, but it rang hollow. The investors didn't look at him. They looked only at Naomi. One of them leaned forward, speaking firmly in Japanese. "From now on, we will conduct all negotiations through Miss Bennett. She understands us. She respects us. That is the voice we trust." The words dropped like a hammer. Executives froze. Clara's eyes widened. And Alexander? His smirk vanished. His empire in this moment no longer revolved around him. Naomi bowed slightly, her heart pounding. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, and the man who had tried to bury her was now trapped under the weight of her light. The boardroom air was electric, thick with a silence that pressed against every chest. The investors' decree had landed like thunder. Naomi Bennett, the maid, would be their voice, not Alexander, not his translators, her. Naomi's pulse roared in her ears, but her posture was steady. She clasped her hands in front of her, lowering her gaze respectfully as the Japanese delegation resumed speaking. Their words, measured, intricate, layered with cultural nuance, poured into the room like a river. And Naomi, without missing a beat, caught every drop. Her translations flowed with precision. She modulated tone, honored pauses, carried honorifics with care. Where the translators had tripped over idioms, Naomi spun them into silk. When laughter sparked in Japanese, her English carried it with warmth so everyone in the room shared the same moment. Executives leaned forward, jaws slack. Clara fidgeted, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her smirk long gone. But it was Alexander's face that transformed the most. At first, he sat rigid, his silver cufflinks catching the light as his hands clenched. His jaw was locked, a vein pulsing at his temple. Then, slowly, his mask of control fractured. His eyes flicked toward Naomi, not with scorn now, but something else. Recognition, fear, maybe even awe. Still, he could not surrender easily. When the investors paused for a break, Alexander rose smoothly, clapping once. "Well done," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I suppose even broken clocks are right twice a day." The room bristled. Naomi's lips pressed together, but she refused to look away. She met his gaze, her hazel eyes steady, burning. "Sir," she replied softly, but in flawless Japanese, ensuring every investor understood. "A broken clock is useless. I am not broken. I am here, and I am precise." Gasps rippled around the table. The investors murmured approvingly, one even chuckling into his hand. For the first time in his empire of glass and steel, Alexander Ishikawa looked small. His arrogance had turned against him. Clara, sensing her boss falter, lunged forward. "This is outrageous," she hissed. "She's a maid. She doesn't belong here, dictating company negotiations." But Mr. Sato cut her down with a raised hand. His Japanese was slow, deliberate, impossible to twist. "Respect is not dictated by title, Miss Hensley. It is earned by conduct, and Miss Bennett has earned ours." The room fell utterly silent. Naomi bowed again, the corners of her eyes shimmering with unfallen tears. For years she had scrubbed these halls, bent low, unseen, and now the men who commanded billions bowed their heads ever so slightly in her direction. It was the turning point. Because at that moment Alexander could no longer dismiss her. The weight of his investors' trust was chained to her name, not his. His empire would falter if he ignored her. His pride, once untouchable, was crumbling in front of everyone who mattered. And for Naomi, this was no victory of revenge. It was survival blooming into dignity. She had not humiliated him with tricks. She had not fought with rage. She had simply been who she always was, capable, intelligent, worthy. The investors adjourned, promising to continue negotiations only through Naomi. They left with small bows, their quiet voices carrying approval. When the glass doors shut, the boardroom exhaled. Executives glanced between Naomi and Alexander, some with awe, some with shame. Clara stood stiff, humiliated by association. Alexander remained seated at the head of the table, his hands clasped tightly, his gaze fixed on Naomi like she was a riddle he could not solve. And Naomi? She stood taller than ever, her uniform still plain, her shoes still cheap, but her presence radiant. The turning of tides had begun. The whispers began before Naomi even stepped off the 34th floor. Word had a way of traveling faster than elevators in Ishikawa Global. By noon, every corridor buzzed with the same astonished refrain. "The maid speaks Japanese." She outshined the translators. The investors only trust her now. Naomi could feel the stares trailing her as she carried her mop and bucket down the gleaming hallways. For years, those same eyes had looked past her, through her, as though she were part of the marble floors she cleaned. Now they lingered, some with awe, some with envy, some with the sour twist of resentment. In the cafeteria, staff whispered behind hands. "She'll lose her job for sure. CEOs don't forgive being embarrassed." "No, didn't you hear? The investors demanded her. She's untouchable now." "She's still just a maid. This won't last." Naomi sat alone at a corner table, her lunch untouched, her hands still trembling from the storm she'd walked through. Dignity burned warmly in her chest, but fear coiled tight around it. How long before they found a way to strip it from her? That afternoon, Alexander summoned her to his office. The top floor was another world. Walls of glass, shelves of rare books, a desk carved from dark mahogany. Manhattan sprawled beneath the windows like a kingdom under his reign. Naomi entered quietly, her uniform stark against the opulence. Alexander stood by the window, his back straight, hands clasped behind him. His reflection in the glass looked regal, untouchable. "You embarrassed me," he said without turning. His voice was low, controlled. "In front of my investors, in front of my staff." Naomi's fingers curled at her sides. "I didn't embarrass you. I told the truth. They saw it for themselves." Alexander finally turned. His dark eyes burned, but not with the same easy arrogance as before. This fire was raw, unsettled. "Do you realize what you've done? They want you in every negotiation. My investors don't even trust my own people now. Naomi held his gaze, her heart pounding. Maybe they don't trust them because they lied, because they laughed at respect. I only gave them honesty. His jaw tightened. He took a step closer, then another, until she could see the fine lines of tension carved around his mouth. For a moment, Naomi thought he might lash out, but instead, his voice cracked, low and uneven. Do you know what it means, for me, to kneel to someone like you? The words hit like a blade. Naomi's chest clenched. She recognized the phrasing, the weight of prejudice laced within it. He didn't just mean a maid. He meant her skin, her class, her very existence standing beside his polished world. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to flinch. Then maybe the problem isn't me, Mr. Ishikawa. Maybe it's you. The silence between them stretched, thick as fog. Finally, Alexander exhaled sharply and turned away, retreating behind his desk, as though walls could shield him from the truth. The investors will be back tomorrow. You'll be there. Do not fail me again. It was less command than surrender. Naomi left without another word. By evening, the story had spread beyond the building. Business blogs whispered about the multilingual maid who stunned Ishikawa Global. Social media threads sparked with speculation. Some called her a hoax, others, a hero. Caleb showed Naomi the articles when she came home, his face alight with pride. See, they're talking about you. You're famous. Naomi shook her head, weary. I don't want fame. I just want respect. She sat heavily on the couch, closing her eyes. Tomorrow, she knew, would test her again. And somewhere inside that glass tower, Alexander Ishikawa was wrestling with something far greater than business, his pride cracking beneath the weight of a truth he could no longer deny. The next morning, the boardroom was crowded again. The Japanese investors returned, faces calm, voices measured. Naomi stood at the far end of the table, uniform freshly washed, her hands folded in front of her. She looked small compared to the towering executives, but her presence filled the room in ways no tailored suit could. Alexander entered last. His suit was flawless, but his face betrayed sleepless hours. Shadows bruised the skin beneath his eyes. He gave no greeting, no smirk, just silence. The meeting began, and Naomi translated seamlessly. The investors nodded often, their respect for her growing with every word. Executives glanced nervously between her and Alexander, sensing where power now leaned. Halfway through, Mr. Sato leaned back, his gaze flicking toward Naomi before settling on Alexander. He spoke firmly in Japanese. Your company has vision, but vision without humility is blindness. You are fortunate to have her. Naomi translated, her voice quiet but steady. The words hung in the air like a gavel's strike. All eyes turned to Alexander. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped the table once, twice. Then, slowly, he rose from his chair. He faced Naomi, eye directly. For the first time since their clash, his eyes were stripped of arrogance. His voice trembled just slightly when he spoke. In Japanese. Miss Bennett, I was wrong. The room froze. He continued, the words rough, almost choking. I mocked you, I humiliated you. And still, you stood taller than me. You gave respect where I gave none. For that, I ask forgiveness. Gasps rippled across the table. Executives exchanged wide-eyed looks. Clara stiffened, her lips parting in disbelief. And then, Alexander did the unthinkable. He bowed, not the shallow, perfunctory nod of a businessman. He bent deeply, fully, his tall frame folding at the waist. His head lowered to Naomi in the gesture his father had once taught him was reserved only for the highest honor. A CEO, bowing to a maid. The silence was absolute. Naomi's breath caught. For a moment, all she could do was stare at him, the man who had mocked her, now bent low in front of the entire board, his pride laid bare. Her chest ached with the weight of it. When Alexander straightened, his voice broke in English this time. I was blind. You deserve better than this uniform, better than these halls. You deserve the future I tried to steal from you. Naomi's eyes burned. She blinked hard, forcing the tears to stay. She would not let them see her weep. Instead, she drew a breath and said softly, firmly, Respect was all I ever wanted. I accept your apology, But understand, my dignity was never yours to give. It was always mine." A murmur of agreement swept the room. Even the investors smiled faintly, their approval clear. Clara shifted, her face pale with fury. She opened her mouth to speak, but Alexander raised a hand, silencing her. His voice, quieter now, carried finality. "Miss Hensley, you're dismissed. Permanently." Clara froze, then stormed out, her heels striking like hammers against marble. The balancing of power had shifted fully. Naomi stood at the center of it, calm, resolute, untouchable. And Alexander Ishikawa, once untouchable himself, had knelt in front of everyone, humbled not by force, but by truth. The days that followed carried a strange, quiet aftershock through Ishikawa Global. Executives walked softer in the halls, as if afraid to echo the arrogance that had once been their armor. The cleaning staff looked at Naomi differently now, not with pity or avoidance, but with pride that shone in their tired eyes. For Naomi, the change was surreal. She still wore the same faded uniform, still pushed her mop bucket down the marble corridors. Yet wherever she went, silence followed her, as if the building itself held its breath when she passed. One afternoon, Alexander summoned her again. She expected another test, another gauntlet. Instead, she found him alone in his office, the skyline glowing gold behind him. His suit jacket was draped over the chair, his sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a titan of finance, more like a man undone. "Come in," he said softly. His voice was stripped of sharpness. Naomi entered, cautious. She clasped her hands in front of her. "What is it you want from me now?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Nothing," he admitted. "For once, nothing. I owe you more than I can ever repay, but I can try." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, Naomi saw papers, applications, scholarship forms, recommendation letters already signed. Her name was on them. "I've set aside funds," Alexander said quietly, "enough for you to finish your degree, anywhere you choose. Tokyo, New York, Paris. You shouldn't be mopping floors. You should be shaping futures." Naomi's breath caught. Her fingers hovered over the papers, trembling. For years, she had buried that dream so deep it hurt to even imagine. And now, here it was, handed back by the very man who had tried to crush her spirit. She looked up at him, her hazel eye, his eyes shining. "I don't need your charity." His gaze didn't falter. "It isn't charity. It's recognition. You showed me what true worth looks like. Let me do one decent thing with the power I still have." Naomi closed the folder gently, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I'll think about it." Alexander nodded, something unspoken softening in his expression. He didn't press, he didn't demand. For the first time, he let go. A week later, Naomi folded her uniform one last time and set it on her bed. Caleb hovered at the doorway, his grin wide, his voice teasing. "Look at you. No more mop buckets. You're really gonna do this." Naomi smoothed the fabric with her hand, her heart swelling. "I'm going to do this." That evening, she walked out of the Ishikawa Global Tower at sunrise, the city waking around her. The glass walls behind her reflected streaks of pink and gold. She carried no mop, no bucket, only a worn leather satchel with her papers tucked safely inside. For the first time in years, she felt free. Not because Alexander had bowed, not because the world had finally seen her, but because she had always known her worth, and now, nothing could erase it. As she disappeared into the hum of the city, Naomi Bennett left behind the title of MAID. Ahead of her lay something far greater, her own future, shining like the morning sun.